Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll show you how you can use a relationship in the Room database. So while using the Room database, how you can insert data in two tables with the primary key and the foreign key, and how you can retrieve from the both table using a single query. So I have already created a UI. So we are going to use this UI. We are going to insert the data in a user table, and then we'll create another table as a address, and then we'll insert data in the address. And then on the next screen, we are going to retrieve the data from both the table and display it on the next activity. So let's start with adding the dependencies. So first of all, we need to add a room dependency in our project. You can add it directly in your Gradle file. Let our project to be synced now, and then we'll start by adding a separate package for our database classes. Now we are going to create a separate class for our database. So let's give it a name, room app db. I have few videos on a room database already, so I'm going to follow the same steps how we can create the database. So just simply we need to extend this with the room database. So follow the same steps. If you haven't taken a look on those videos, then you can get detailed information from those videos. So now we need an entity. So first of all, let's create an entity class. So give it a name, user entity. If you want to give a table name, so we can give it as a table name, otherwise it will pick your class name itself. It will create a table in your database with the class name. If you want, you can give a different name. And it's a simple data class, and the parameters we want to keep inside, so we need to declare inside those brackets. So first parameter, we need a ID as a primary key. It should be auto generated. We need to simply declare with the column info, give it a name as ID. We need to give it its type. Similarly, we need to define other columns. So we have name, so let's take a look. We have phone and email, so we need to define those columns as well. So let's give it a name. That's it for our user table. Now I need to pass. So whenever we have our entity, so we need to define that in our database class, and now we need to give it a version number that we increase whenever we have update or we are migrating our database. So you can initially give it a name as number as a 1, version number 1. Now we need to define our database inside the companion object. So we'll initialize this instance variable, and create a function which is going to return that instance variable. That's it for database class. Now we need to create another class for our DAO. So let's create it. That is the interface user DAO. This interface is going to hold our queries or insert functions. So this function is going to just return the data from the user table. If we need to use, then we can use it. Otherwise, later I'm going to create another function which is going to return data from the board table. So this is for the simple query. So select start from user. Let's double check the name. Yeah, we have user table. So this is going to return newly added records on the top, and it is going to return a list of user entity type. Now we need insert function which is going to use to insert the user profile information from the UI. It is going to take input as a user entity. This function is going to return a long. So this is basically going to return the ID which is auto created, and then we need that ID later on to use at a foreign key in our address table. So I'll show you that. And now we need to create another function which is going to use as a insert for address. So now we need to create another entity address. So let's create it. Similarly, address table should have the primary key, so I'm going to make it as a auto generated. So this is going to be our foreign key. So user ID, I'm giving it as a name ID itself, as a its type. So I'll show you how you can make a relationship between this ID and the ID defined in the user entity. Let's check what are the columns we have. So we have address, city, state, and zip. So let's define it. Now you can use it in our Dao. Now this is the query which is going to return the data from both the tables. So let's create a function. And it is going to return a list of different, which is, let's create another data class which is going to hold both the tables parameters. So that is the simple data class, not the entity. Just keep it in mind, this is not going to be an entity. It is the simple like data class in Kotlin or the setter getter class in Java. So we'll just define the columns, or we can say the records, same as both the tables. So make sure to use the same name what you define inside your entities. So this is from the profile and this is from the address table columns. And that's it. And now use it, pass it inside the list. And now we need to write our query. So this is simple. Select star from user and now inner join in address. Okay, so we haven't defined, I think, address as a entity. So let's write this complete query and then we'll make a relationship. User dot id equal to address dot user id. So I define it as a user id. So let's make it an entity. And here I'm showing you how you can create a relationship between these tables. You need to give our class name. And now the parent table or parent entity column name, which is actually having the primary key. And now in the child table, like, or in your case it's the address and where it's pointing, so it's a user id. And that's it. And now we need to use user id address dot user id. That's it. Now let's go to our activity and try to insert data in our both the tables. So let's create a separate function, save data in room, and we need to handle the button click. So let's get the button id. I haven't created, so let's create a button id. There you go. So now we need to create its on click listener. So on the save button click, it is going to store data in both the tables and then it will retrieve on a different activity. So this is how we can read the input data from the added text, and we are holding it in our variables. So in each added text, whatever user has entered, we are just reading the data. Now we need to create an instance of our database. We need to pass the context. Now here we need to write another abstract function which is going to return the DAO. User profile DAO. That's it. Now call this function from main activity. There you go. Now we can directly access those functions which we defined inside the DAO. So insert user, as we define inside the function definition, so it is going to return the ID. Let's hold it in a variable, and it's taking the input as a user entity. So let's create it. Create an object of user entity. Similarly, we need to do the same for the address table. So we need to call insert address, and now create an instance of address. We already have address, so give it an address entity, and we have these columns: integer, integer, string, string, string. Okay. Here we need to pass ID, which is as a foreign key. Yeah, so that's it for storing data, and now we need to create another activity so that we can display data on that. So I'm giving it as a name profile activity. Let's create a UI for it. I'm just adding a one text view as of now, where I'm going to display the whole object data. Let's go to profile activity and read data from the database. First of all, when data is stored, then we need to launch that activity. So I'm starting that activity. Now close the current activity. That's it. and let's go to our profile activity and write the code to retrieve data from the DB. Similarly, we need to get an instance of our database and the DAO. So in the main activity called the insert, now we are going to call query function. So we already have a function named get all user with address. So you need to just call simply, and it's going to return the list of user with address and data class. So currently I'm just making a loop on this list, and we'll display it on a text view which we already created in our layout. So since it is a loop, let's retrieve those objects, because it's going to be multiple objects. So let's keep it in a string buffer. If I could have directly set that data on a text view, then it could have displayed the last object only, but we need to display all the data, so that's why I'm holding it in a string buffer and setting it on a text view. Let's run our application, that's all. So I'm going to input some data. There you go. So one record is inserted and we are successfully able to retrieve it. Let's beautify our layout. So let's make some modification in our layout so that we can display retrieve data on each text view. So I'm going to put some more text view on this activity so that we can see it very clearly. Now on each text view I'm going to set that data based on our column name. So separately each text view is going to just display the name, address and other information. All set now, let's run it. So now we need to add another record to go to the profile activity. So let's add one more record. Now it should show our two records. One is which we added previously, and now this is going to be added as a new record. There you go. So we are successfully able to implement it. So guys, that's all for today's video, and thank you so much for watching it. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share. Thank you.